Hello, everyone. Welcome to Headlines and Prophecy. Today, we're going to look at lawlessness. But first, let's do a little review of the last couple of weeks. We had a broadcast 2 weeks ago about the normalization of the United Arab Emirates with Israel, which allowed them to establish economic ties, trade, commerce, healthcare, education, tourism. And it's quite an event as more and more nations begin to normalize. In the last 2 weeks, Serbia and Kosovo both normalized relations, as well as Bahrain. And so, as we continue to see this normalization move, where economies begin to tie together in travel and tourism and commerce and trade and healthcare, we're beginning to see an alignment prophetically where nations are beginning to legitimize Israel as a state, and not only legitimize it, but normalize relationships with them. This was always a trump card with the Palestinians in their negotiations with Israel for a two-state solution. And what's happened is these countries, in their own self-interest, have begun to move toward not normalizing relationships themselves, which has great economic benefits, great benefits for the country and tourism but prophetically, we're seeing the lines being drawn in the sand where the more moderate Sunni nations are becoming less aggressive in their stand toward Israel, while the Shias, which is Iran and Turkey and thought anyway, Syria, are becoming more aggressive through Hamas in that division. So you may want to go back a couple of weeks and take a look at that broadcast. Today I want to talk about lawlessness, which virtually occupies the news cycle today. It is prophetic in Matthew 24, I think it's verse 12. Jesus said, "And where iniquity abounds, the love of many will wax cold." Speaking of the church, and that word iniquity is lawlessness. So it says, where lawlessness abounds, the love of many would wax cold, or our love would wax cold, because we're looking at circumstances and it vexes our righteous soul. And we see it across the country. And I want to look at, how did we get here? What is it? How did we get here? Why is it happening? To try and help us understand it and understand as it pertains to prophetic events. What are the headlines? Well, you've seen in Portland, I think we're approaching or have passed 100 days of rioting, looting, and burning. The governor and the mayor have refused help from the federal government. They actually blame it on the federal government. We've seen New York and Chicago and various places across the country where entire cities have become ravaged with terror. And this was or started as a peaceful protest. It started, when a black man was killed by a white officer and George Floyd, and it sparked outrage across the country. But the movement, which, and I can't tell you, I'm not a black man, I can't tell you how it would be being pulled over or harassed by police. That's an entirely different situation than the lawlessness we're seeing. There needed to be reforms in police departments. It was very difficult to fire a police officer. But what they've done is they've hijacked it, and they've made every police officer evil. They've made defunding the police, which makes no sense at all. If any one of those folks who are being attacked, they would call the police department. They would dial 911 themselves. It's crazy to even think about it. But what we're seeing is cities, entire cities, being hostage or taken hostage by their political leaders for political gain. They can't ask President Trump or the U.S. government for help, otherwise it looks like they're participating. But in the meantime, entire economies. New York is losing citizens. They're losing millions and billions of dollars. People are moving out. People aren't going back there. I mean, there's a whole change coming about because of lawlessness. You see in Chicago, 50 to 100 people getting shot and killed every week. And there's this refusal to get help from the federal government. The only way you stop violent protests and violent riots is through force. I mean, people, you need to use force against it. It's not, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. They allow this to continue because there's an agenda behind it. And that agenda actually began, I want to go back to the 1960s and show you how we trended to this point and why we're here. So if we go back to the 1960s, in the 1960s was a very turbulent sort of revolutionary time in the United States and around the world. I mean, we had the assassination of President Kennedy early in the decade. We had Martin Luther King, who really helped spur the civil rights movement, but did it in sort of a godly way. It was a lot of what he preached and taught was godly. We've seen that hijacked after. We've seen the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. We've seen the sexual revolution. We've seen Woodstock, right? We've seen people coming together saying, free love. Sex became more open. The women's lib movement started. We began to see aggressive riots toward the Vietnam era. And so there was this sort of whole liberalization. And with the liberalization also came, a cultural change. And in that cultural change, we've seen televisions start to go into every home. We began to see sitcoms, it really, in a way, programming us because we're watching the sitcom, we're identifying with the character, it's showing us an alternative lifestyle. And good, bad, or indifferent, no matter where you are, our lives were changed. We went from sitting on the front porch and talking to our neighbors to going inside and building a wall around our backyard and a privacy fence, right, and living in the back of our homes. Things began to change radically, and I think there's a song. I know there was a song, "Imagine" by John Lennon, that sort of sums up this movement because it really is an atheistic movement. It's a move toward or away from Christianity. Here's John Lennon's song. I believe it was published in 1971. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living life for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will become as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. And we started down this track of anti-capitalism in a way, one world, sort of love, peace, joy, sort of socialism thinking in a way. And we started this movement, in the 60s, and it began many trends. And here's the thing. The people that participated, the young people that participated then, from say 14, 15 to 25 to 30, that, went to Woodstock and protested, and the liberalization and the movement away from capitalism, and those folks, I was 10 years old then, so I'm 62. So they're in their mid 60s, early 70s. They're running universities and companies and colleges and the 7 pillars of society, the media, and so their children and their children's children are there's this movement. I mean, what made our country great, what made the United States great, was we were a republic, a democracy, but by and large we were a Christian nation. And all the way through the centuries, men and women guided their own lives based on God's principles. And then it made it very easy because we had a country of law and order. And as we began to break free from Christianity, people began to identify away from Christianity and begin to form their own thinking and their own, even Christianity in the 60s. We started to see the first radio and television evangelists. We didn't have to go to church anymore. We could watch it on television. So all those seeds were planted and they trended to where we are today. And where we are today is we have it's an atheistic, socialized movement to bring our country in a different direction. The elitists, I mean, think about it. In John Lennon's song, imagine there's no countries, they're for open borders, right? Letting anyone in the country. So you or I and our families that may be third generation in a business or a building or here entrenching ourselves in society now have people pouring in that there was no screening done. Allowing rioting in the streets. We've always had riots. We've always had protests, but never did the government turn a blind eye to it until their homes were rioted and pillaged, right? So where are we going? Where are we headed? This is all trending toward, eventually, this group will take our nation. You say, well, how, Sebastian? What do you mean? Matthew 24 says that the Christians, not the self-identified Christians, but the Christians that live the life, that adhere to God's principles and words, that pattern their lives after God's principles and words, that they would be the enemy of the state. They'd be hated by all nations. That doesn't say some nations. It says you'll be hated by all nations. Psalm 2 says that we would be outcast, that they would cast their cords from us and we would be outcast. Why? Because we're not tolerant in a loving way. I mean, what they do is they make us xenophobic, or they make us haters. We don't hate the LGBTQ community. We don't hate people. We love people, but we don't want sin invading our homes. We don't want the government to legitimize sin. And therefore, we have this greatly divided nation where we have a group that is, socialistic, big government, less entrepreneurial, where the government provides much and there's no incentive to grow. They also provide a platform where lots of the laws of the land will become more and more anti-God, anti-Bible, anti-preaching, and eventually we will become the enemies of the state. I mean, the Bible says that. Here's the thing, it doesn't have to happen on our watch, right? We can vote. We can vote the right leaders in. We can vote the wrong leaders out. We can become vocal. We can stand up, and we can be heard. Amen. And the biggest thing that we can do is we can pray. And we could begin going back to church. This house arrest that we're under right now, we can go back to church. There's safe ways. If you have fear, there's safe ways to go to church and not contract what we're going through now. But clearly, the world has changed, and it's time for us to push into prayer like never before. I'm just going to give you, before we close, and a lot of you watching today are probably from the East Michigan area. We had a prayer event at 11/11/11, November 11th of 2011. We rented Ford Field. The guy named Lou Engel in the call rented Ford Field, and we prayed for 24 hours. We worshiped and prayed for 24 hours. We had about 30,000, just short of 30,000 people join in. And from that point, Detroit, the heavens opened above Detroit. I mean, the economy took off. The black and white racial divide that has always gripped Detroit left. We elected a white mayor, which is black or white, it doesn't matter, but we elected a white mayor. Most of the corrupt politicians went to prison. But the other thing is that even today, in this city where we have Rosa Parks and great civil rights riots, and we have nothing here. I mean, it's been very, very tempered. We have a great police chief here. But I believe it's because of that prayer, and I think we can do that for our nation. We can begin to pray for our nation and have 24-hour prayer events in our own churches and open the heavens above the United States to bring us back to godly prayer. Even though the Bible prophetically says we're going to be in a place, it doesn't have to be on our watch. There's also, in the end times, places like Goshen where there's protection, where there's godly protection because the heavens are open. Prayer works. Prayer is never wasted. No prayer you ever say is ever wasted. I ask you to join us. We're going to do these every Monday. Share them with your friends and family. Go to our website at watchersoftruth.com. We have teachings. Every Saturday I teach on end times or eschatology, and every Tuesday I teach a Bible study. And there's hundreds of studies there. There's hundreds of different items for yourself, blogs and other Christian information. So I pray that you'll join with us. God bless you. Until next Monday, you have a great week. Thank you.